All right. So today I had the idea that I wanted to talk about library creation or curating and building your own sound library. So I had some other topics that I did want to discuss earlier, but this one seemed kind of appropriate since I'm sure, as is true for myself, a lot of you probably have a significant amount of time on your hands right now and trying to look at the positives of it. What can we do with that time to, to really get the most out of it? So one thing I thought of was the library creation. So library creation is quite a process. And when I'm talking about library creation, I don't just mean making a library to put up and like sell like on a market. I mean, just building your own personal library of sounds. As a sound designer, it's a really important process, and I don't think it really gets talked about as much as maybe what I would like. I mean, I certainly, I've seen others share their process, but really, I haven't seen it come up as much as a topic that I would like to. I'd really like to know more about other people's processes in this regard. So, building a library. Okay. So, I have a couple main points I want to go through. This is going to be a little different style video than usual. Mostly just going to be focused on showing you my process here. So it's less of a creative endeavor maybe than the other previous things that you're used to seeing from me, but nonetheless very important. So let's jump right into it. The most important thing that at least that I've come to realize about building a library is, and this kind of almost goes, this could be a more broad concept than just that, but you need to have a system in place. Okay. So if you have this idea to build this grand, huge library, or even you just want to passively be able to build up your library better, you need to have a system for how it's going to happen. Because if you're worried about thinking about it in the moment, how you're going to accomplish it, and you don't really have any kind of, any kind of pathway to follow, then there's going to be too much chaos. And that'll just in the end lead to you not really doing it as much as probably what you would want to. So step one, have a system in place. So with creativity, there's this balance, whether, maybe it's certainly something that I kind of came to realize a little bit later than maybe what I would have liked to, but there's a balance between the chaos and the order of creating, whatever it is. So the chaos is the creativity part, right? So that's just where maybe I sit down at my my synth rack and I'm just playing. I usually like to record what I play, but that's kind of the chaos, is just the raw discovery process, just trying things, just making up, whatever. Okay, so that part is important because you need to have a sense of you need to have a place where there's a sense of freedom where you're not really thinking about the process yet. So you need to have just time to kind of just allow your ideas to run wild. Okay. But then there's going to be a time where you have to rein those in. So it's like, okay, I've sat here and I've played and I've done all kinds of weird noises with my synth. Now, how do I ingest that into my library? Okay. So that's the part where having this system is really going to come into play heavily. All right. So before I really get in, I'm going to show you an example, kind of how my system runs. But before I do, a couple of other important points. So just because you have a system in place for ingesting sounds and creating material doesn't mean that you have to stick with it forever. Okay, that's also a daunting thing. Is now you're thinking, oh, I have to have this perfect system in place to where I'm always going to follow it and it's always going to be the same. Well, you're going to end up improving it over time, and you kind of have to accept that that's okay. So it might not be perfect from the start, right? But it is important that you at least try to develop it. And so hopefully what I show you here will be, an insight into that. And I do have some key points over here just so I can stay on track, but you should write your system down. Okay. So once you have something that you feel is a good system to follow, and I know I'm saying the word system a ton here, but once you have that, you should write it down. That way you can continue to follow it, you can continue to track, and just have a way that you can kind of quantify how that system operates. And also so you don't forget, because especially when you're first starting out, you might have a great idea for how you want to implement it. But then ultimately you might forget things, right? So write it down. The other reason you want to write it down is so that if you ever have to explain to somebody else, maybe you're going to hire somebody, maybe you're just going to collaborate, you're going to have somebody else come on and help you build your content. If you have the system written down, all you have to do is say, here, this is how I do it. And if you want to, come on and help me, then now they have the instructions of exactly what your expectations are, right? Okay, so with that, let's take a look at, let's see. All right, so let's just take a look at my process of ingesting recorded sounds, okay? So there's a couple different steps to it, and this is all going to be different depending on what your goals are. All right, so I have, all right, let me flip over here. So I have a couple tabs open on my Mac browser. So the first thing is, if you are recording a significant amount of material, after you record it, where does that stuff go? Okay, because if you record stuff and you just pull it into a project automatically, that stuff could get lost, like if it's a project that you work on and then you don't come back to it again for a few years, but you may have recorded a lot of really cool things. But if you don't have a way to bring that into a greater library, then, it's not doing you as much good as what it could be, right? So every time I record something, I bring it into this drive that I have here, and I have a recording sessions folder, okay? So you can see I have it going back all the way to 2013 or 2013. And then I'll jump to the more recent thing. I'm not going to go through all these. But basically, I go by year. So every year, I create a new folder here. And so I'm in 2020. So inside of this folder, I have 3 others. So I have a recorded folder, which is as soon as I import something, I'm going to create a folder for it. And then it goes directly in here, okay? So in my recorded folder, this is all raw recordings, okay? So you take them in, and I have this template folder, okay? So this template folder is something that I'll duplicate and then rename every time I do a new session, okay? So inside of that, these are the things that are inside of my template folder. So I have bounces, right? So this is where any of the edited material that I'll get from the raw recordings are going to go into there first. All right. Now, and then there's a raw folder. So this is important. So this is literally where, let me go to, this is going to be a better example if I go to actually one of these. Okay. So I'm inside of this session here, or this recording session, and I have a raw folder. So this is where all of the raw recordings right off my recorder, they just get dumped right into here. And I will add a name in front of the information from the recorder and dates if applicable. So usually my sessions go by date. So every recording session, it doesn't matter if it's related material, I give it a new folder and a new date. All right. All right. So then I have a cleaned folder. So anything that I'm going to do to these raw recordings in terms of, noise cleanup, anything you would typically do in Isotope RX, just to improve the overall quality, I will take the raw recordings, do all that first before I ever bring it into a DAW, like Pro Tools or whatever it is that you use to do your editing. I'll do the cleanup first, and then the clean file goes into the cleaned folder. So I'm maintaining these raw files. They're completely untouched, and if I need to go back to them prior to the denoising or restoration, I can always go back to them. It might be overkill, but it's one of my little idiosyncrasies. I just like to keep the raw stuff. So from there, I have an edit session. Okay, so this is just it's a Pro Tools session template that is automatically in here, and what I'll do is I'll rename it, and then open up the Pro Tools session, and then I will add any of the clean files in there, and then I'll begin my editing process. So from there, any of the editing as I separate, takes and I figure out what I want to keep or what I don't want to keep, or basically what should come into my library or what's not going to be as important for it to be in the final library. Excuse me. I'll do my edits and then I bounce those out or export them into the bounces folder. And then I'll have a pre-mastered folder. So here, you're getting kind of a look behind the scenes of something I'm working on. So all my files pre-mastered, and these are not the final naming conventions. I take care of the naming after the editing. So in these pre-mastered folders, you'll see nothing is really named the final name that I'll give it. But I'll take care of that later. All right, so things are kind of starting to become organized. I will organize in categories or props. And then from there, I'll master those. So I'll do, any kind of normalization or anything like that that's going to basically be the final step before those assets go into my library in terms of the sonic quality of them. So if I go into the master folder, you can see I actually have started renaming some of this stuff. Just so this is something from a recording session some of you may have seen from the other day. It's ball pit. Right. So after I do that mastering process, I then will do the naming, and then from there, this stuff will get added into my library. All right, so it just goes right into, I use Soundly, but whatever library management system you're using can go in there. Or let's see if I go to, so here's where I keep all of my design libraries. So this is just a folder with all my finished libraries. It's not all of them, but these are all of my commercially available ones. So this is kind of the best way kind of to demonstrate what they look like. So these all go into a folder here together. And then from there, you go into your library management system like Soundly or SoundMiner or whatever, if you are going to use that. If you're not going to use a management software, at least everything should be well organized in these folders. Okay. All right. So now in terms of if I'm doing a commercial library, I have another folder. I have a libraries folder where I have work in progress. So these are libraries that I'm currently building in one way or another. I have a published folder. So these are all libraries that have been published or things that are available commercially. I also have a non-commercial folder. So these are things that I've given away. This is kind of a new addition to my process. So there's things that I've given away that aren't in here, but this is just stuff that I like to share for free. So that go in there. And then, so here's where I have another template folder for any commercial library I'm going to create. I will, set that up, duplicate it inside here. We have a host of different folders again. So I have a deliverables. So that's where the actual file that gets uploaded to my website or, gets shared on a third-party distributor. It's going to go into that deliverable file. And this is the template, so there's nothing in there, of course. Documentation. Let me show you here. This is probably, this is a good example here. So if I go into documentation for this sci-fi weapons or UI elements, and also sometimes at this point, my naming conventions are not finalized, but in deliverables, okay, I haven't made a deliverable yet, but under documentation, what I like to do in my documentation is any sound design session or a session where I'm basically taking my assets and I'm, actually creating, if it is a designed library where I'm actually creating that stuff, I create aliases to all those folders in the documentation so that I know which Pro Tools sessions correspond to how this library was created. For, time down the road, if I'm like, how did I do that one thing in that one library? Where literally I can go to the library folder and I can go look at my aliases and I can find the session and I can go in and find exactly how I designed something in the past. Graphics. So if I'm creating graphics for a library, they're going to go in here, which I haven't created any for this one yet, but I'll have my Photoshop template and then my JPEGs or my the final export that I'll use for internet or whatever purposes. Images. So any images, raw images that I use building that graphic, they'll go in there. The library itself, so the actual library files, pre-deliverable, so before I compress it or whatnot, they'll go in here. So these are a bunch of different categories. I haven't filled them all out yet, of course. This one, let's see. So yeah, this is not really organized completely yet, but you can see here, this is, again, we're going to get a little look at some stuff I'm working on. Right, so there you go. You can hear something for once. I've been doing a lot of talking. So yeah, that's where the library files go. And as I'm organizing them and getting them prepared, they kind of live there for the moment before they go to that final library folder, which I showed you already. Paper deliverables. This is a weird one. Some places where I distribute my library, I need a PDF to go along with it for the deliverables. So that's where those PDFs will go. Previews, any kind of video preview or SoundCloud preview file, and the subsequent Pro Tools session for that will go into this previews folder. Okay. So that is that's a pretty well encompassing look at my how I ingest and how I move sounds from place to place. One additional thing is my sound design folder. So my raw sound design sessions, again, where all the aliases lead to, they'll go by year. So right now on my workstation, I only have 2020 stored on here. Everything else is archived. But you can see here things that I'm working on, or things maybe I just made a session real quick just to play around. It doesn't all necessarily have to be tied to a library. But you can see these are all Pro Tools sessions. All right. So any of that design stuff, that's where those aliases will link to, is here. Now, if I'm working on a session, I want to be able to track if I've exported what's in there to a library or not. So I have this exported to work in progress. So anything from here that actually makes its way into a library will go into this folder so that I know that. And then I have another folder down here. This is less related to any commercial work, but I have a sound design reels folder. So this is where I will keep any cinematics. They'll go into this folder where they can kind of live there. And if I want to do some redesign, those things will be there for me. And then I have some StarCraft. These are some of the things I worked on recently. So my last video, that was the bombing run. It's just what I titled it. So these have inside of them a design session and then a mix session. All right. So again, that's just a smaller look at that kind of aspect of my, not necessarily library building, but my session management. Now, what you're not seeing here is any kind of freelance projects. They do not get stored in here, and I can't go into that because there's things that I don't want to take a risk at showing some of the stuff that is in there that I can't show. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of my ingestion process. Okay. All right. So next part, I want to talk about different approaches to fleshing out your library. So there's what I like to define as an active and a passive approach to building your library. Okay. So both of these approaches are going to be easier if you have some sort of system in place to where you're making the stuff, you're bringing it in, and then, kind of like what I demonstrated to you. All right. So they're both going to be much easier with that. So active library creation, let me maybe define what that is exactly. So active library creation is where you have an idea. You're like, hey, what would be cool is I want to make a user interface library. I want to make a Gore library or whatever. You're going to have a concept. And from that concept, you're going to start to organize ideas about what you want to make. Okay, so that would be active creation, where you start with an idea and then you're focusing efforts towards that, right? Passive library creation is something that is easier to exercise on a day-to-day basis. So that's just, as you find something cool, around the house, or whatever that you want to record and add to your library. You do that. You have a way to bring it in, and then it goes into your library. And then maybe at a later point in time, you have enough stuff that you've collected passively. You'd be like, hey, you know what? I sure do have a lot of recordings of contact mics on coffee makers. So maybe I can make a library out of a bunch of contact mics on coffee makers. All right, that should give you a clue. I love to record coffee makers, so I have quite a bit of those, and actually I'm going to include them on something in the future. So a passive approach is generally easier, and it you can set up a method of doing it that gets you involved with a short amount of time investment each day. So each day, if you just record like one thing, think about over the course of a year. If you just recorded one unique thing every day for a year, it's 365 different things that you've now recorded, different props. And most likely when you got to record a prop, you're probably going to come out with, a handful of different ways of performing the prop. So let's just say on a given day, you go out, you record a prop, you spend 15, 20 minutes doing that. You could easily end up with 100 different takes. Or even if you're a little more conservative than that, you can end up with 50 different takes of a prop. Okay. So do the math, you're going to be, if you just kind of keep it up passively every day, there's certainly a lot you can accomplish in terms of building that library. Right. So I think that's definitely an important thing to kind of think about, because I think for at least I know for a lot of people, the task of kind of doing what I'm showing you and kind of maintaining this is a little daunting, because you're like, oh man, I'd love to have, a bunch of recordings of these things. It's like, how do I, set aside the time to do that all at once? So the key is to not try to do it all at once, right? Do a little bit at a time, and kind of reduce the heavy lifting. Just, 15 to 20 minutes a day, try to record something. All right. So that's kind of a big piece of advice that I think if you're going to take away anything from watching or listening to this, that passive approach is something you should look at how you can implement. I think it's really, really valuable, even if you're not going to do like an active building commercial libraries or any kind of active approach, really. Which the active approach is really something you want to focus on when you have the downtime, right? So if you're already working on a bunch of projects, or you're working full-time in-house somewhere, you might not always have the time to be like, hey, let's really explore this idea. So save those for when you have that available time. So right now is probably perfect available time for a lot of people. I know it certainly is for me. I've probably worked on more active, libraries in the past week than I have maybe in this whole beginning of the year so far. So here's something that I wanted to say about active library creation. So when you are making a library, especially if it's one that you do intend to maybe release commercially, when you're coming up with the idea, make sure that you go on to the places you're looking to distribute it. So prime example, if you're looking to distribute a library on a sound effect, so let me pull open the website here. I already put in a search, but if you're looking to do, UI sounds, do a quick search and see what's already out there. You don't want to, you definitely don't want to be competing with other people as much as you don't have to, but you also want to provide some value that's not already here. So if you see something similar to your idea, think, okay, how can I do that, but maybe put my own spin on it? And more often than not, once you kind of get started down that train of thought, you can usually get yourself to a place where your idea can be very different than maybe some of the stuff that you're looking at here. So do your research, take a look, see what's available. Yeah, so just kind of you would listen through these and then make sure that what you're going to do is on some level, different than what's already available here. All right. So the final area that I'd like to focus on here is kind of a nice way, I think, to wrap it up. And what are the things you can do to create a foundation to be successful in this particular endeavor, right? So one of the biggest things is be ready to record. Okay, so if you like to make it a goal to have more in your library, to be ingesting more, then you're gonna have to like actively plan for that. So be ready to do it. One thing is having a mobile rig. Okay, so having something like like a Tascam DR40. Okay, that's probably one of the most inexpensive portable recorders you can get. It has XLR inputs, something like that. I believe it's about $150. Maybe it might be less than that, but it's very basic, but pretty robust little recorder. I've had one for, I don't know, 10 years. If it's been out that long, I don't know. I just know I've had one for a very long time. So have your recorder, have something that to be able to avoid holding it in your hand if possible. So have a little tripod or something like that, and then have some kind of wind protection. All right. So have this be, it's ideal if it's a handheld recorder, because that's something you can kind of carry on you all the time. But if you have that with you all the time, I always throw mine in my backpack. So wherever I go, I usually have my backpack. And so if you're ready to do it, you're going to be more likely to do it, right? So that's kind of the idea. I don't want to get into talking about gear in this one, but there are some considerations. But I just think in this regard, you need to have something that gets you into the game. I think having a portable recorder, it doesn't matter what it is an invaluable thing as a sound designer. So whatever it is you can get, I don't care if it's like, even if it's, lower quality than the DR40, which I can't think of there's nothing that in particular comes to mind as a cheaper recorder. But what I'm trying to say is it doesn't really matter because having any recording is better than having none at all, right? Even if you record it just on your phone recorder. I don't know. I believe iPhone. I think it's in. I believe it records in MP3. I honestly don't use it that much, but at the very least, having a recording is always more valuable than none at all, right? So another thing, and this kind of feeds directly into that, is reduce the friction in your workflow. So this is something I kind of did with myself as I sat down. This was something, a couple of years ago, I was trying to improve being able to do things more passively. I asked myself, what is preventing me from right now just sitting down and recording something? Or what is it that's preventing me from, wanting to do that? So ask yourself, figure out what the friction is that is preventing you. It's probably a little different for everybody. But one thing for me is that I absolutely hate setup time. So I don't like to set up the mics. I don't like to, get the cables out. And there's a whole host of things that can also go into setup that can be annoying. Mostly when I'm setting up, usually, especially if I'm setting out on my garage, which is where I do a lot of recording. If I had to set up tripods or mic stands, I might, be out there already and I might forget a cable that's inside. So, the uncertainty of, getting set up and maybe forgetting things that you need, it becomes this type of friction. Okay. So for me, that was my biggest thing is I hated setup. So I made a checklist for myself of all the things I need for a very basic record session. And as I'm getting ready, I can check them off, and then I'm not forgetting things inside the house that I have to keep coming back and forth to get. Okay. So another thing with setup is if I can reduce how much setup I have to do in the first place. So I like to have my tripod if I'm going to record video, which I try to always record video just for, posterity, so I can see what I've done. And then I have my mic stand that's ready to go. And if I can, I have the mic clip already on there. So all I have to really do is bring my recorder outside, put the mic on, and then I'm good to go. All right. So whatever that friction is for you, figure it out and figure out how you can reduce it. Okay. That's the main, that's kind of my main tip for that. All right. So another thing, using your time wisely. Okay. So, or maybe another way to put it is make sure that you're doing what's appropriate to get the most value out of the time that you're spending doing this. Okay. So one good example and you'll see this in some other videos that I'm kind of showing you, is if you're working on sound, especially for a demo reel, anything that you record or anything that you create while working on that reel. So whether it's the recordings themselves or the design work that happens during that reel production, make sure those are things that get ingested back into your library. So that's what I did with my my jet whoosh video, or my futuristic whatever I named it, the futuristic vehicle design that I just posted not more than a couple weeks ago. Everything that I did from that got exported and re-imported back into my personal library along with the raw recordings themselves. So in that sense, yes, I was, you could say I was working on a demo reel, okay? But then I was also building my library. So there's, look for areas that you can get value out of and make sure that you are getting that value from that time spent, right? Because it'd be one thing if I did the reel and I did all this really cool sound design, recorded some cool things, and then, maybe I put it up on my, put it on YouTube, or I add it to, what I'm sending out, to get work. But then I forget all about those really great sounds, and they're not helping me down the line in the future when they could be. All right, I think I've hammered on that enough. I think sometimes I get to where I'm kind of talking in loops a little bit, but I hopefully that is provides you with a clear understanding of what I'm talking about there, about using your time wisely. All right, I think, you know what? I do believe that sums it up pretty well for this one. If you have questions, or even, I would encourage anybody watching this, if you have a process of your own for doing these things, I'd really like to see it, honestly, whether it's in a blog post form or whatever. But I'd like to get more people sharing these type of things, because I'm going to tell you that my process is far from perfect. And I have I'll say there's a laundry list of things that I want to do to kind of improve on it. And I'm kind of working on it. But yeah, I think there's not ever enough tips shared in this department. So I will leave you with that. Thank you for your time. And, I know this is, I don't want to harp on it too much, but it's a difficult time we're going through. And I really hope everybody's doing okay. And, if there's anything that I can help you with, I've certainly got a lot of time on my hands now. So any questions, you can talk to me directly on Twitter is usually the easiest way. It's just, for conversations, it just tends to be what I prefer. So at SoundSparkChase, I'm here. And if you want to talk about something, or if you have any questions at all, never hesitate to reach out and talk to me about it. So, yeah, that's it. Hope everyone's taking good care of themselves, and wish you all the best.